Then sings my soul. I bet you can name that hymn because it's one of the favorites of people around the world. And in the area of hymnody, it's probably not as old as most of the hymns in the hymn book. It's a very unusual hymn in that it was first written in the Swedish language. And of course, we know that is How Great Thou Art. Back in the late 1800s, there was a Swedish evangelical pastor named Carl Boberg. And he had an experience one afternoon, and I bet you've had the same experience, where he was out in nature, he was walking along, and all of a sudden a thunderstorm came up. And he was quite terrified. It was so powerful, and it was really just shaking everything, and it just seemed like it would never end. But when it did end, he was amazed at how calm, how beautiful, how fresh, how clean, and how the birds started singing. And it really brought him to his knees, that experience, the contrast of the power and then the peace that came. And he was inspired to write a poem. And most hymns start out as a poem. But he wrote this poem, and it had 9 verses. And in Swedish, and I do not have a Swedish accent, but it was O stor Gud. And it meant, O great God. Well, Boberg was also an editor of a publication, an evangelical publication, and he published his poem. And a few years later, as he was going around and preaching in different churches, he was surprised to hear the words of his poem that had been kind of coupled with a Swedish folk tune, and it was being sung by congregations. It was just something that's kind of sprung up. And of course, I'm sure he was delighted, but the hymn became so popular that it was translated into German and used in German churches. And then it moved beyond that to even Russia, and it was translated into Russian. And so the hymn was quite well known in Europe before it came to the United States. In the 1930s, there were English missionaries, and the pastor was Stuart Hines, and he and his wife began to minister to the Russian people in the Ukraine area. And it was while they were there that they began to become acquainted with this hymn, and they sang it first in Russian. And as they traveled through an area of Russia called the Carpathian mountain range, they were struck with the beauty of that mountain range. And he began to try to translate the Russian into English words. Well, this is towards the end of the 1930s. And in 1939, when war broke out, World War II, they had to return to England. And he had translated 3 of the verses, the 3 verses that we sing, first 3 verses, into English, and began using it in gospel meetings there in Britain. In the 1950s, 1954, Billy Graham and his crusade team went to London, and they had a 3-month evangelistic crusade. It was just going to last for a week or two, and people responded in such numbers that it went on and on. And this became one of the favorite hymns of that crusade. And of course, Billy Graham's singer, George Beverly Shea, made it very, very popular. But also, it was a song with great expression, a hymn that could express in words what we often feel about the majesty of God, the beauty of God, the love of God, and then that God will return in Christ Jesus one day. And it was not until after the war that Stuart Hine penned that 4th verse, which is a very triumphant verse. I know that you're going to enjoy listening to Lowella's rendition of How Great Thou Art, and maybe you could even sing along with it today.